And I ask this because there's a huge question around, for example, China's treatment of its Muslim population. And this is a story that never even gets addressed, never even gets spoken about. We saw a shocking story on Al Jazeera this week, which spoke about, Muslims in internment camps being forced to eat pork every Friday as part of what's called re-education. Do civil liberties not matter at all? When it comes to India, the whole world comments. When it comes to China, everybody's quiet.
大家好，欢迎来到烽火的频道。本期视频分享的是印度主持人和马凯硕的一段视频采访对话。从视频当中可以看出，这位女主持人对中印关系、边境问题以及中印未来的认知和思考已经走入死胡同了。所以特此来求教马凯硕。这位女主持人非常有意思，她认为莫迪总理和习近平主席建立了良好的私人关系之后中国就会在边境问题上让着印度。他认为中国占领了印度的领土。马凯硕也直接打脸，表示中国并未占领你们的一寸土地。他还提到中国的经济政策是一种掠夺性的行为，是新的帝国主义。反正造谣抹黑也不花钱，对吧？反正怎么爽怎么来吧。马凯硕对这位女主持人的言论也都进行了客观公正的回应。最后这位主持人竟然引用外媒的言论说中国每周都会强迫穆斯林人吃猪肉。马凯硕直接指出这其实就是西方的虚伪的宣传而已。这段对话值得让人深思好了，废话不多说我们一起来看视频。
Good evening. My name is Barkadat and you're watching the Mojo Story, our independent digital platform where we do a deep dive into the most pressing stories of our time. On the program today, as Joe Biden gets ready to take charge of the White House, what about China? For India, this is an extremely pressing question because even though we have not seen conflicts take place at the border in the last few weeks, there is still a massive buildup of troops. The Chinese came in, taking control of tracts of Indian territory, leading to India saying that China had violated long-standing agreements. The Indian military retaliated, and we are now seeing an effective militarization of the high Himalayas, with some saying that Ladakh is heading on to become the new Siachen. We asked today, what is the way forward? How should India tackle China? And in a post-Trump Biden presidency, what might be the China factor and the China policy? How will the world realign itself, especially at the time of a pandemic? On the program today, we're joined by one of the foremost public intellectuals of the global stage, someone who has been a diplomat, who has been in the world of academia, who has authored several books on China, including the book Has China Won? It is my pleasure to welcome Kishore Mahbubani to the program today. Welcome, good evening, and looking forward to a great conversation with you and hoping that you can help us decode the big China question, Kishore. Tell us a little bit about the picture first as you see it. I mean, obviously, from an Indian perspective, we'll get into the India question and what India's options are in a moment from now. But the big global picture, you've got Biden replacing Trump. What is that going to change when it comes to China?
I think when you ask for the big picture, it's important to take a long-term horizon. And you can see over the long term, as you know, from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India. It's only in the last 200 years that Western Europe took off and then the United States took off. So the past 200 years of Western domination of world history have been an aberration. All aberrations come to a natural end, and today in PPP terms, number one economy is China, number two is United States, number three is India, number four is Japan. So what you're seeing is the massive return of Asia. And to be very candid, the country that's leading the massive return of Asia is China, because the Chinese have clearly outperformed everybody else in taking the world's largest population and now rejuvenating it. And you're seeing a very strong, powerful bounce back of Chinese civilization, essentially. And of course, that has triggered in turn a very massive United States reaction to it, because no great power likes to go from being number one to number two. Everyone was going to fight it. So the biggest geopolitical contest you're going to see, which is inevitable and which has started, is between US and China. And that's what my book, Has China Won, is about. And it points out that it's driven by deep structural forces. And that's the big picture.
But let me ask you this. When you talk about the return of Asia, as it were, and you say that that's a return that will be led by China, you talk of, Asia being one entity without its own conflicts. And at the point, we are seeing probably one of the most tense phases for India and China that we've seen in recent history. I think not since the 1960s have we seen this sort of conflict at the border between our two countries. And one of the things that officials in the government tell me all the time, and I'm sure you've picked this up as well, is this is not the India of 1962. We are not that country. We are not that prime minister. We have a different approach. We're a different country. And therefore, the pictures you're seeing on your screen are actually of the massive military buildup at the Indian side, where basically India would argue that it's responding to China's deceit, that China has been in violation of long-standing agreements, right? So when we talk about the return of Asia, how does the return of Asia take place when India and China are in the kind of conflict that they are in?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Asia is a massive place. I forget what the total population of Asia is, 3.5 or 4 billion people. And there are many different parts of Asia. And there are parts of Asia that are clearly working very well. Certainly East Asia is doing very well. You're going to see a massive new economic ecosystem develop all the way from Japan, Korea, all the way to ASEAN. And I want to emphasize that ASEAN is a very important player in all this. It's 650 million people, and it's already the 7th largest economy in the world. By 2030, it'll be the 4th largest economy in the world. Everybody talks about China, nobody talks about ASEAN, but ASEAN is also very, very important. And of course, India is very, very important. But once you go east of, west of India to West Asia, then clearly it becomes very dysfunctional, right? So you can see how East Asia is very functional and West Asia is dysfunctional. And I would say they are right. The Asian story is very complicated.
Yeah. So given the complication and given and I'm sure you've been tracking what's happening at the border, and in India, one of the missing pieces of the puzzle is why would China do this in the year of a global pandemic, a pandemic that originates in China, at a time when the Prime Minister invested a great deal of personal energy in building a relationship with Xi Jinping. And in fact, for people who've counted the number of times they met, they actually have met 18 times in the last 6 years, right? So, you see Prime Minister Modi investing this huge amount of personal capital, huge amount of time and energy in building this relationship. And then you see, the sort of dissembling of this relationship take place. How do you read that? Are you not able to hear me? Are you not able to hear me? Sure. Okay, try pulling your headphones out. Okay, Professor Mahbubani can't hear me, so we're just going to try and reconnect to him. We'll get him back. Maybe the headphones are a problem. Try pulling them out and see if you can hear me. Just pull them out. No? Okay, let's.
No.
You can hear me?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I lost you.
No worries.
I didn't hear a word of what you just said for the last 3 minutes.
Okay,
Sorry.
I'll repeat that.
I was thinking, I wasn't hearing anything.
If you face that problem again, just pull your headphones out. Sometimes that happens. I have no idea why. But you can hear me right now, correct? You can hear me right now.
Yes.
I was saying that the Prime Minister invested a great deal of his personal capital in trying to build a relationship with Xi Jinping. And we've counted the number of times the leaders met in the last 6 years, and it's 18 times, right? So from the Indian perspective, it hasn't been for lack of trying. So if you had to decode the conflict that is actually taking place at the border, how how do you understand China's sort of motivation, and how would you think India should respond?
Well, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, I can. We can always hear you. Go ahead.
Good. Number one, I think it was very wise of Prime Minister Modi to meet Xi Jinping 18 times. And I can say this as a diplomat who has been a diplomat for 33 years. There is no substitute for face-to-face meetings, no substitute for face-to-face conversations. I can fully understand why it cannot happen now because of all the mood or over the border issues. It cannot happen soon, but it's good that they have done it. And I hope that they'll go back to it someday. But you have a very specific question on the border. And frankly, I don't have the information on what exactly is happening at the border. Because it's interesting that you say that China has taken over Indian territory. And your Prime Minister has said categorically that China has not stepped into 1 inch of Indian territory. So, and that's what your Prime Minister has said on record categorically.
Just to interject there was a subsequent clarification from the Prime Minister's office after those comments to an all-party meeting, saying that what he meant by those comments was that the Indian military had pushed back the Chinese aggressors, and that was the context of those comments. And since then, we've had Foreign Minister Jaishankar only say this much on record that negotiations are on. So I just want to contextualize the remarks made by the Prime Minister. But yes, from an Indian perspective, you've seen the Chinese apps that have been banned. You've seen the kind of cold freeze in relations. There's definitely a view on the Chinese aggression and incursion. And I'm just asking you to contextualize how you think the return of Asia is possible with our countries at loggerheads.
Well, you're absolutely right. I think if India and China go at loggerheads with each other, then the Asian century is gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
Finished.
Yeah.
And so it's very important that China and India get their relations right. And as you know, all of Asia wants China and India to get their relations right. And it's important for China and India to step back and ask themselves what is really, really important to their people today. Is it really that important whether you succeed in getting a few square miles of territory at the border? Or is it more important for both your countries to do well? And so if both countries can step back and say, okay, we have more important issues to do, and there are ways and means of diffusing these issues. So, and I hope that both sides will make an effort to try and diffuse the issues. But as you know, the reason why this problem has happened for 2,000 years, one reason why China and India lived in peace is because the Himalayas were so formidable. There's no way that armies could cross the Himalayas. It's impossible. They were massive. But today, with modern technology, both sides can build roads up to the limit. Both sides can have helicopter flights close to each other, and that's how this friction is happening over territory that is contested by both sides. So it's very important that both sides make a huge effort to say how important is the border issue relative to other issues, and that's what I would encourage both sides to do.
But as a diplomat, you can make that comment. But as you would know from having served at the highest levels of government in your own country, a government can only act in response to public opinion. And what you call a sort of a few square miles of territory would be India defining its territorial integrity. Countries have gone to war for less. So I just don't feel as sanguine as you do about India and China getting into the same lane. I think at the moment they're not even on parallel lanes. They're on a possible collision course. Things may have quietened down, but we came very, very near to a military escalation, and we still have hundreds of thousands of troops eyeball to eyeball. And how do we look away from that fact? And if you were talking to friends in India, what is it that you'd be saying to them?
Well, I would say learn from best examples from all over the world. And, India, of course, has only recently fought a war with China in 1962. Let me give you the example of Vietnam. Vietnam has been, in one way or another, fighting China for 2,000 years. Vietnam was occupied by China 1,000 years. The biggest war that's been fought in recent years was between China and Vietnam, where you had a few 100,000 soldiers fighting each other. And then from 1979 to 1990, that was the most militarized border in the world and full of mines and artillery and everything. Now, that was 1990. Today, you go to the border. There are no mines. There is no artillery. There are no more few 100,000 troops. It doesn't mean Vietnam and China have fallen in love with each other. I can assure you the Vietnamese are as distrustful of the Chinese as they have been for 2,000 years. But now that border is one of the most heavily traded borders in the world. So it is possible to go from a situation where you've been enemies and you've had few 100,000 soldiers actually not just face each other, but fight each other as recently as 1979. And today you have a border that is frankly one of the most peaceful borders in the world. Even after, by the way, Vietnam claims that China has stolen some islands from Vietnam. You see?
So, yeah, I see the larger point of what you're saying, but I want to pick up on trade, right? You spoke about this being one of the most traded borders in the world. Now, when you talk about trade between India and China, there are people who will point to the trade deficit. India has chosen to stay out of the RCEP agreement, the regional free trade agreement that it was negotiating, in fact, to be part of. And then because of what's happened at the border, I think that had a big impact on it. But there are also those who see China's economic policies as predatory. You've heard that language, in fact, used by people who served in the Trump administration. There are certainly domestic industry concerns in India that China is swallowing up the Indian market, swallowing up the Indian industry, that this is a kind of neo-imperialism. How would you respond to those concerns? Because you mentioned trade as a defining basis of Vietnam and China. And if it were to be that for India and China, I think there would be an outcry in India.
Just give me 10 seconds. Huh? I'm going to show you something. 10 seconds.
Okay. Okay, so that's Kishore Mahbubani, who's, I think, going to get us something. You can see his book at the shelf behind has China One, who seems to have a very pragmatic sort of understanding of what he thinks India should do next.
Just
go
2
ahead.
hours ago,
Yeah.
just let me see, it's 9 o'clock, sorry. 5 hours ago, the Prime Minister of Singapore launched this book, India on Our Minds.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
And he spoke. And you know what he said? He said, we will always keep the door open for India to join the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And I can tell you, everybody in East Asia would love to have India back into the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And I want to emphasize the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is not one country called China. There are 15 countries in it. Not just including some of India's best friends. Japan is there, Australia is there in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And I want to, I know I hope you don't mind if I want India to succeed. I want India to do well. I mean, I want to emphasize that, okay?
Yeah.
My mother was a very fervent Indian nationalist. So obviously I want India to do well. But, at the same time, as a student of geopolitics for 50 years, the worst thing that a country can do in the game of geopolitics is to get emotional and irrational. It's very, very important to be very cold-blooded and calculating in your analysis. And let me emphasize the one important point. The geopolitical game today is no more about aircraft carriers, fighter jets. It's not about that anymore. It's about the size of your economy. And that's the most important thing you need to do. And the lesson that you've seen from India's experience, when did India have the biggest growth phase? In the 1990s, after Manmohan Singh and Montek Singh Ahluwalia opened up your economy, right? And look what happened. You became a tiger, right?
Right.
So the Indians are the most competitive economic animals in the world. The Indians can compete anywhere in the world. And you see that in the United States, the most competitive laboratory in the world is the United States of America. Which is the most successful ethnic community in the United States? Is the ethnic Indian community. So clearly what you need to do, the lesson that we have learned is you have to open up your economy and compete. Even if you have a short-term pain, you get long-term gain. And capitalism is about creative destruction. And if you prevent creative destruction, you prevent long-term growth. So I'm being very brutal about this. Because at the end of the day, India can compete. I have great confidence India can compete. And, you mentioned the RCEP. They know that, out of 15 countries, you have problem with one country. You can negotiate a bilateral safeguards agreement. And I think you can work something out with China to do that. But you have the other 14 countries that still want to trade with you.
Okay, let me be a bit provocative. We had a comment on our live stream saying that it's like modern colonialism, and I remind you, and since you mentioned that your mother was a fervent Indian nationalist, that the British project of India started with the East India Company. So trade is often the precursor to a certain kind. Now, no one is suggesting that this is going to be territorial capture, but there is a sense in India of the capture of the markets by China, right? And I think that while you can say be cold, be brutal, any Indian government has to be mindful of what's happening to its own economy. There is no country in the world that doesn't have elements of some protectionism. I mean, there's what China is doing with Australia, for example, right? There are tariff wars between China and Australia as well. So is it as simple as you make it sound?
Okay, you're right. It's very good to be very frank. Are you protecting the poor people of India? Or are you protecting the rich people of India? And I will argue with you that in India's refusal to join the RCEP, and I'll be very brutal about this, is because you have some very rich vested interests that will suffer. And so you have a choice. So if you want to help the poor people of India, and by the way, the record of is I want to emphasize you there's 650 million people in Southeast Asia. The country that has been the most successful at poverty reduction in the entire human history is Vietnam. Vietnam was at war for 50 years, okay? Non-stop, 50 years, 1939 to 1989. And then it stopped. You know what Vietnam did? Vietnam opened up its economy. Vietnam integrated with the rest of the world. Vietnam accepted the creative destruction. And I can tell you the World Bank President Kim said, no country has reduced poverty as fast as Vietnam has. So forget China. Why doesn't India look at other countries? Look at Indonesia. Indonesia's population is 250 million, right? Indonesia, by the way, is far behind India in economic development. And guess what? They opened up and they're growing, right? So the lesson is very clear. Are you going to protect a few vested interests who are very prosperous? Or are you going to help the bottom 50% in India? And you want to help the bottom 50% in India? Forget China. Learn from Vietnam. Vietnam is a good friend of India.
Okay, the one thing that China is not open about, when you're suggesting that India's economy should be open and to be protectionist is actually protecting vested interests. What about democracy? What about political and civil liberties? And I ask this because there's a huge question around, for example, China's treatment of its Muslim population, and this is a story that never even gets addressed, never even gets spoken about. We saw a shocking story on Al Jazeera this week, which spoke about Muslims in internment camps being forced to eat pork every Friday as part of what's called re-education. Do civil liberties not matter at all? When it comes to India, the whole world comments. When it comes to China, everybody's quiet.
Well, I think, as you know, India was very upset when Prime Minister Trudeau yesterday made some comments
about the farmer protest.
Yeah. And I think we in Asia are wiser than the West is. And just to put in a big historical context, I've been a student of the West for a long time. The West has lost its political domination. It has lost its economic domination. It only now has intellectual domination. And it preserves its intellectual domination by lecturing the whole world on human rights issues. When the West, as you know, is completely hypocritical on human rights issues. I'll give you a simple example. The European countries will condemn any country that carries out torture, right? If India carries out waterboarding, the European countries will be the first to insist that India stops waterboarding. But when the United States was the first major developed country to reintroduce torture, the European countries kept absolutely quiet. So on human rights, it's okay for NGOs to speak about it because NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, they're completely objective, neutral, and they don't carry agenda of anybody. But whenever any government tries to criticize any country on human rights, I say they've got double standards because they will only criticize their adversaries and not their friends. And just, since you mentioned how bad the human rights situation is in China, in the 1971, when United States was fighting the evil Soviet Empire, it had a choice. It could either join the world's largest democracy in India to fight the Soviet Union, or it could fight the largest communist government in the world, which, by the way, under Mao, saw far greater human rights abuses than anything you have in China today, right? Far greater. And you know what? The great democracy, United States chose China over India. And I think many Indians, if you don't mind me saying this, can be very naive about geopolitics. Geopolitics is not about friendship. Geopolitics is not about whether they like you or love you. Geopolitics is all about what's in my interest, and that's what they will do. And so I think it's important to the European Union also wanted to impose human rights standards on India also. So that's what they've been doing all the time. So it's important in geopolitics to be, as I said, calculate what is in your interest and do what's in your interest.
But what happens then to civil liberties? I actually agree with you. I agree with you on the one point that you make, that a lot of commentary by the Western world is full of humbug and full of hypocrisy. I mean, I remember this time, for example, when Obama was on a presidential visit to India, and before going, he made a lot of comments about the constitutional sort of need to preserve pluralism in India, which of course is all true. But then he took the flight from here to Saudi Arabia, where he didn't say anything of the kind. So one does see all of these gaping double standards. But when you think of, and I agree with you on that, but when you think of these Muslims in internment camps in China, and you hear the horror stories that come out, should the world look the other way? And there are things, for example, when you look back at, let's say, apartheid and Africa, there have been moments in history when global pressure has pushed change. So, is your binary really sort of always applicable?
No. By the way, I want to emphasize that we should advance human rights.
Yeah.
Because, I don't want to live in a country where my nails are being pulled out, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But just since you mentioned apartheid, I mean, you must surely know the reason why the apartheid regime was so resilient and could survive so many years is because United States and United Kingdom supported South Africa. I mean, I hope you know that.
Of course.
Apartheid,
Margaret Thatcher, and the enormous pressure on Thatcher from the Commonwealth to actually impose those sanctions. But
and you know that the United States Congress declared Nelson Mandela a terrorist. And do you know that they only removed the terrorist title 6 years after apartheid ended? I mean, look at that. So you tell me that the United States is a defender of human. United States.
I don't care about the United States. I'm just asking how the world should react. The world is not the United States.
True. But at the same time, I completely agree with you. But as you know, if someone came to India and lectured India publicly and say, why did you tear down the mosque? Why do you do all that? Everyone's going to react very badly. But if I want to tell a friend of mine, right, hey, I think you're doing something wrong. If I broadcast it in the media, he's not going to change. But I know if I talk to him privately and try to talk to him, things will change. And I have seen in my lifetime so many countries where the human rights situation has improved dramatically. And I'm going to go back to Indonesia. You know, in 1965, the estimates of the number of people killed after the coup is a few million, right? Few million, okay? Now, guess what? Look at Indonesia today, how it has improved. And you know how it has improved? And you want to know the real story? You know what? They elected a president, SBY, who studied in the US in a military college. And he learned the most important lesson. The role of the military is to be subservient to the civilian government. And Indonesia, which was a military-run government, right, for many years, like Pakistan, okay, suddenly changed. And how would that change happen? It's through quiet persuasion and through peer pressure. So all this grandstanding on Xinjiang is not going to get you anywhere. But if you want to change Chinese behavior on Xinjiang, and I would say, frankly, if it's about Muslims, don't you think the Muslim countries should take the lead? How is it that when the Western countries wrote a letter criticizing China, not one Muslim country supported that letter, not one. So it's better for the Muslims to go to China quietly, talk to China quietly, and see what can be done. And I believe that such quiet persuasion can make a difference. And I'll give you another example, okay, since many of your viewers may not believe me. For so many years, the West put sanction after sanction after sanction on Myanmar. What happened? Nothing, zero. What did ASEAN do? ASEAN said no sanctions. We will welcome Myanmar. Come join our family. But you know, after joining ASEAN, Myanmar went from being a Syria, right, towards becoming a reasonably stable, well-balanced state today with no major civil wars. That's amazing. I mean, it's not perfect. But look at the transformation that we have done. So how did we do this? And I can tell you the Indonesian foreign minister who brought in Myanmar said the only way to do so, to transform people, is to talk to them privately. So I would say, talk to the Chinese privately. Don't join the West in grandstanding.
But you know, when you speak about the silence of the Muslim countries, one of the countries of the world that has remained silent is Pakistan, right?
Yes.
And from an Indian perspective, Pakistan now is seen almost as a kind of vassal state of China. And so when these border tensions, in fact, erupted, one of the things that the Indian military had to war game was for a possible two-front conflict, and it's always war game for that. But there's a kind of Pakistan is sort of being seen as a continuum of China. How do you see that relationship? Obviously, for China, it's all about self-interest. For any nation, its choices are about self-interest. There, I agree with you. But from an Indian perspective, we're looking at this. We're looking at Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. We're looking at the sort of one road project, and we're going. Pakistan is just like now an addendum, almost an addendum to China.
Well, in international affairs, I always believe that the biggest problem is when you get emotional, right? Mm-hmm. And if Pakistan was a complete vassal state of China, why does it go to the IMF when it needs assistance, right? Mm-hmm. It's a vassal state of China. It should say, to hell with the IMF, to hell with all that. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And so I would say that, it's a big mistake to use labels, okay? Yeah. And it's also important to ask yourself, again, if you don't mind me being very frank.
No, please.
Southeast Asia had as many divisions as South Asia has today. Indonesia had a confrontasi policy against Singapore and Malaysia. Indonesia blew up a bomb in the middle of Singapore's financial district, killing Singaporeans, right? a terrorist act. Thailand and Malaysia have fought over separatist provinces. Philippines claims a state in Malaysia. I mean, these are all still ongoing problems, by the way. You know what? Look at how we manage problems. You will always have problems between states. That's a given. The only question is how you manage those problems.
Right.
And I would say it's very important for South Asia to come to Southeast Asia and say, how is this in these countries? And the divisions in Southeast Asia are as serious as anybody's. Out of 650 million people, you have 250 million Muslims, 150 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, Hinayana Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists, and you have Taoists, Confucianists, Hindus, and communists. Southeast Asia is the most diverse region of planet Earth, which is why the British historians calls it the Balkans of Asia. And logically, the cultural differences in India are nothing. Nothing. And look at me. I mean, I grew up as a child. And even till today, the only reason I could write my book, Has China Won, is because I got to listen to Muhammad Rafi. And where was Muhammad Rafi born? In Lahore. And I went to see his house in Lahore, right? So you're telling me that the cultural difference within Pakistan and in India is that great? Come on. So if Southeast Asia, right, can overcome far greater differences, and the differences will be there. You can't change them. Don't believe that magically we will live in a fairy tale world where we'll all like each other a lot. No, we will never like each other. We'll be different. But you have to live in the real world. And in the real world, there are real success stories. And Southeast Asia, the most important thing about Southeast Asia, every Indian should know, and I've documented this in my book, ASEAN Miracle, 9 out of the 10 Southeast Asian states have an Indic base. And I can tell you in 2017 or 2016, please check, when Philippines, the world's largest Catholic country, Philippines, organized an East Asian summit, and when all the presidents were there, Obama and everyone and were there, what did Philippines put on as a cultural presentation from the Philippines? The Ramayana. Aren't you shocked? The world's largest. So here in Southeast Asia, where you have Indic cultures, we are able to get along despite our differences. And frankly, South Asia should learn some lessons from Southeast Asia on how you manage differences. Because you're not going to change each other. You have to learn to accept that we are different. And by the way, I know the Singapore and Malaysia, I can give you an example how neurotic it can be. We were married for 2 years. You were one country. Then you know what? We got separated. And then we continue to live in the same house. Can you imagine a divorced couple living in the same house? That's Singapore and Malaysia. But you want an example of good cooperation? Come to Singapore and Malaysia. So we have real success stories. So why does India always focus on problems of the past, on differences, and not focus on what can be done to learn lessons from others and learn to find a better way? There are better ways.
How do you see, for example, the Pakistan-China equation?
Well, I think, geopolitics, as I told you earlier, where just as the United States chose the world's largest communist country under Mao Zedong as a partner, countries don't care what your internal system is about. If it suits their geopolitical interests, they will work with the country. And right now, there's a convergence of geopolitical interests between Pakistan and China. So that's what happens. So, and just as there is, by the way, a convergence of geopolitical interests within India and United States today. That's what's happening also. And that it's not driven by the fact that they like each other or believe in each other. It's about geopolitical interests. But I do believe, I'm going to say something that will shock you.
Go ahead. I'm pretty shock-proof, but try me. Yeah.
Okay. That I can imagine a free trade agreement between China, India, and Pakistan that will benefit all three countries.
That does shock me, and I can't see
exactly.
it happening.
Exactly.
happening in my
I know.
lifetime.
You see, exactly.
Yeah.
But what I described to you is what has happened in East Asia. China and Vietnam are far greater adversaries. And look at the trade between Vietnam and China today. It's amazing. So, and at the end of the day, why is Vietnam doing this? Let me tell you what Vietnam is doing this. Vietnam is trading heavily with China, not because the Vietnamese love China. They are using China to make themselves strong in the same way that China used the United States to make itself strong. So you use your adversary to make yourself stronger. Now that's the best game of geopolitics you can play.
Okay, I have some questions for you on our live stream that I want to actually just pick up one by one. First is that Abhishek Singh says the onus of resolving the differences between India and China at the moment should be on China. Why blame India?
I'm sorry. I can only help you by being very frank. I've studied geopolitics for 50 years. I don't know of any geopolitical dispute where one side is 100% right and the other side is 100% wrong.
But there are acts of aggression. There are acts of military aggression. There are acts of military aggression that are recorded. I mean, that the British were colonialists is a recorded fact. That there are, I'm just giving you one example. So I'm saying there are everything is not normative. Some things are empirical.
No, so as you know, in the case of China and India, the border dispute, you also know that 3 times the Chinese leaders, Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, proposed to India, we will never be able to figure this all out, this border dispute. Why not just accept the line as it is and settle as it is? And as you know, 3 times India turned China down. That's also a fact. And frankly, I think it was unwise to turn down that offer. It was very unwise because that would have settled the matter. And as you know, China has settled its border disputes with Russia, with Vietnam, with Mongolia, with everybody else. It's settled. So it is possible to do a deal. And I think it's important, therefore, to figure out at the end of the day, if you want to succeed, you got to figure out what are my bigger, more fundamental interests. And this is a marathon race between China and India. It's a marathon race. We will know the winner 100 years from now. And the marathon race will be determined by who has the stronger economic legs. If your economic legs are weak, you will lose the race. If your economic legs are strong, you will win the race. And by the way, if India can achieve half the per capita income of Indians in the United States, India will have the world's largest economy by far.
Right.
So the potential for the Indian economy is #1 in the world.
But let me
country can match the economic potential of India.
But let me push you on this, on the free trade point that you make when you earlier said that India can compete with anybody. We have a question on our live stream from Sanjay who says, no, I don't agree. The free trade agreement between any country and China can only benefit China because trade with China is a one-way street.
Okay. By the way, trade can never be one way.
I think the point is that it's not a level.
Excuse me. You know something? Yeah. If it is all one way, you know what's going to happen? Nobody, if others don't benefit from trading with China, then they won't have money to buy goods from China, to buy goods from China. And by the way, if you look at Southeast Asia again, it's amazing that the Southeast Asian economies, which were behind China in so many ways, many of them have surplus with China. And by the way, it is possible to negotiate a free trade deal with China where the China will give you unilateral concessions temporarily to enable you to catch up in the competition. And China was very generous to Southeast Asia in giving what they call an early harvest in that.
So I want to give you a sense of how a lot of Indians feel, and that's why I'm picking up an emotional question, even though you spend a lot of time on the conversation saying the one thing you should never be in geopolitics is emotional. But this reflects how many Indians are thinking and feeling today. Nandita Ghosh on our stream says China wants to push India into a war and then it will crush India. There is a sense, what you call the marathon competition on between India and China. There is a sense that there's room for only one winner here. Right. Yeah. And that is why the kind of sort of coexistence that you're speaking about, even though there are not the kind of historical conflicts that India has with Pakistan, with China. And, I remember Modi used to say before this border conflict that not one shot has been fired at these borders for decades. That unfortunately now doesn't apply. We're actually seeing a kind of, we've seen a military conflict. But how do you address this Indian apprehension, which is very real, which is very widespread? That now the narrative is it's not Pakistan, it's China that's the real adversary. It's China that has blocked, for example, UN sanctions against terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jamaat-e-Dawa. You've served as the president of the UN Security Council. You know what these concerns are about. So just address that concern that China does not even stand with India on the issue of terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the question from Nandita Ghosh that China wants to push India into a war and then it can try to crush India. Yes. Sometimes some truths are very painful. The Chinese are very, very concerned about a war. But they're very concerned about a war with the United States. Very concerned. Right. Because the United States is clearly trying to push China down. I mean, that's obvious, for obvious reasons. And if you go to Beijing, and of course, I've been there a few times, and you mention India, they look very puzzled. Oh, really? They're concerned about us? Why? China, I was amazed at the indifference of the Chinese to India. Because for them, their number one threat, and by the way, there'll be a monumental struggle between US and China in the next 20 years. The Chinese have only one obsession. They got to survive this US onslaught against China, which is coming, which is, as I say, I've documented in my book, Has China Won? And they are focused on that. And so as a result of that, that creates opportunities for others. So it creates opportunities for Southeast Asia. Because in Southeast Asia, because China doesn't want Southeast Asia to become an anti-Chinese lake, the Chinese are doing their best to build win-win economic partnership with Southeast Asia. And I can guarantee you this, that if you can sit down and have a rational dialogue, where you've got to push aside your emotions for a while, you'll find that China will be very happy to work out a win-win arrangement with India too, for the same reason that they want to focus on the United States. And you're right to point out the major trade deficit between US and within China and India. You're absolutely right. But there are ways and means of dealing with trade deficits. And, for example, when the United States was very worried about the major trade deficit with the Japanese, as you know, the United States and Japan had negotiations, and the Japanese agreed to what is called VERs, voluntary export restraints. So, that what I'm saying to you is there's no problem in the world is new. Every problem has got a precedent. And so you can find ways and means of dealing with it, and then take advantage of the larger market.
And there are questions on that, and I'll come to that. But if the Chinese are indeed indifferent to India, how do you explain this mass military buildup at the border with India? Well, why block sanctions against terror groups like the JUD and the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar, which is, this is a fight that's been happening over the years at the UN.
I completely agree with you. It's a huge mistake to block sanctions against terrorist groups. But as you know, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Exhibit A, Mandela. Mandela was called a terrorist by United States, as you know. But on the cases you mentioned, yes, it's unwise of China to block the designation of terrorist groups. I agree with you there.
Okay. Pradeep Arora on our live stream seems to sort of have your way of thinking and says, should India use the differences between China and the United States to our advantage?
It's very simple. Be cunning. Be very cunning. See, geopolitics is not about being nice. It's about being cunning. It's as simple as that. I mean, and that's what great geopolitical thinkers are about. Henry Kissinger, George Kennan, they're very cunning. And how are they cunning? What is the best position India can be in this dispute? The best, if you can imagine a seesaw, okay? On one side, the seesaw is China. On the other side, the seesaw is United States, right? The seesaw is going like this. What's the best position for India to be in the middle? So wherever India puts its foot, the seesaw goes that way. And guess what? Both United States and China will be super nice to India. That's about being cunning.
But I would have said before this border conflict with China, India was probably there, though probably leaning towards the United States, but still trying to be in the middle of that seesaw. And I think that because of this conflict, if there is no resolution in this conflict, you will see India leaning closer to the US than to China. If India can't sit squarely in the middle, India has to be guided by her own self-interest, the same self-interest that you say China is guided by.
Joe, as I say, geopolitics is about being cunning. When China made its reconciliation with the United States in 1971, you know which government China recognized as the legal government of China? Do you remember that? The United States government didn't recognize the People's Republic of China. It recognized the opposite government, Republic of China. So can you imagine that? Okay, just imagine if just imagine this. If China says Pakistan is the ruler of all of South Asia, right? And just imagine that. Then, despite that, India makes a deal with China. That's the analogy. And why did China do that? Why didn't China insist and say, you must first recognize me as the legal government of China? The Chinese said, no, it's okay, don't worry. Right now, I need you because I have the bigger game against the Soviet Union. So the fundamental problem in India, and I told you, right? My mother had a very close shave as a Hindu nationalist leaving Pakistan. She was born in Sindh, and she had a very close shave. My mother is the most fervent Indian nationalist I ever met my whole life. So I understand Indian nationalism very well. It's in my blood, But at the same time, if you want to succeed in geopolitics, the biggest mistake you can make is to be emotional. Indians are so emotional about this whole affair that they can't realize it suits India's interest. Let me emphasize this, to say, look at the bigger picture. How do I play the bigger picture? Why am I so focused on the border issue, right? And the number of things that United States provoked China on were far greater. But China said, doesn't matter. I want to focus on the big picture. And so what I would do if I was in India is focus on the big picture and not get emotional about that. And on the border issue, by the way, one of my colleagues at NUS, I've started something called the Asian Peace Program.
Yes.
And there are simple, commonsensical solutions. The reason why you had fisticuffs between Chinese and Indian soldiers is because they went to check whether a tent was there or not there. Why don't we put technology, right? Use advanced technology. Put technology all the way down within China and India borders. Put sensors. Then you don't have anybody having to go check. And both sides have a common setup. So there are technological solutions to make sure that you don't clash against at the border again.
But you know, there are many emotional questions for you. Much as you urge Indians to not be emotional, you are agitating them to be more and more emotional. And I'm seeing a number of agitated comments. So Rajshekhar Reddy asks you, are you saying India should surrender Ladakh to China in exchange for some trade deal for a few billions? And a similar question from Abhishek Sharma. In your equation of geopolitics, what happens to territorial sovereignty? And I think that's an important question.
I would say don't give up an inch of Indian territory.
Yeah.
Don't give up an inch. And I would say you can make a deal where you keep every inch of Indian territory and get more if you are cunning and not emotional. And this is what is puzzling, you know. It's very strange. I mean, Indians believe that geopolitics started 1 or 2 years ago. It's a 2,000-year-old game, right? And you always must play the long game. And you must maximize your advantages, always, right? And don't lock yourself into a position where you have no other option. Never do that. Give yourself plenty of options. And the more options you have, the better off you are, right? And just as, you know, just as the United States was able to use a country that was technically an adversary of the United States, China, and help it to win. Use your adversary. Use China. Don't be so emotional as to say, I can never use my adversary. Why not? You should be cunning. You should use your adversary.
Talking about technology, how do you see the Indian move to block a whole host of Chinese apps?
Oh, I would say that's peanuts. Peanuts.
Why?
You know, life is much bigger than this TikTok, PUBG. And this is an example of being petty. It's peanuts. The Chinese don't care. The Chinese, remember, from the Chinese point of view, there is a much bigger game. And you can ban TikTok, you can do all that. It doesn't hurt China at all. No, zero hurt at all. But the important thing to ask, if I was an Indian, I would ask a very simple question. My number one competitor today is China.
Yeah.
What is China doing right? What is China doing wrong? What is India doing right? What is India doing wrong? And then calculate. And then I can tell you, let me come onto your program 10 years from now.
10 years. Okay.
10 years from now.
Long,
and I'll tell you the world,
game.
and I'll tell you what the world will be. 10 years from now, United States will be number 2. China will be number 1. And you know what? China and the United States will come to some accommodation. 10 years from now.
And I can tell you the United States and China and India, where will China and India be 10 years from now in this equation, in your opinion?
It all depends on how cunning India is. It all depends on how you play the game. Right. You see, right now, you have a window of opportunity because China is still number 2. It's much easier to negotiate with the number 2, not with the number 1. But you want to wait 10 years? Then when you negotiate with the number 1, it's much harder. So you got to be very brutal about these things, and stop being so emotional. I mean that's a fundamental problem with the way Indians look at the world. By the way, I'm not. You know, every other country looking at this whole thing is sort of wondering why are the Indians so can't set aside one thing and say, okay, let's focus on the big picture. The big picture is the economic game. Right. And are you winning the economic game, or are you losing the economic game? Very simple.
Okay, we have just 2 minutes left before we have to close. So let me ask you in the end about what even Prime Minister Modi has called an expansionist China, right? And the expansionism is driven not just by its economy or its wealth but also by its policies with other countries in this region, right? So whether it's Nepal, whether it's Bhutan, whether it's Sri Lanka. And then there has been a kind of counter movement by countries by organizing themselves into a quad to create a kind of counter influence. How do you see this phrase expansionist China? Do you think the world need not be scared of an expansionist China? Do you think India does not need to worry about an expansionist China?
Anybody who believes in the phrase benevolent great power is an idiot. The phrase benevolent great power is an oxymoron. All great powers for 2,000 years bully. It's a reality. And so the way you deal with bullies is you accumulate your own power. You make yourself strong. You make sure your economy grows faster. That's how you take care. That's what Vietnam is doing. Vietnam is making sure that this economy is growing at 7-8% a year. It's becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. But if you don't get that 7 to 8% economic growth, then you're going to lose the game.
I like that sentence, that the way to stand up to bullies is to accumulate your own power. That I could agree with. But I think what you're saying is that in the modern era, the only way to accumulate your own power is the economy.
Absolutely. That's the only game in town.
So a prescriptive note to end on, specific prescriptive note for India, since you said you wish us well, you want us to do better, you want us to compete.
Very, very, very simple. This is Deng Xiaoping was the man who created modern China. He asked a very simple question. Why are Chinese succeeding all over the world and doing very well, but not in China? Problem, Chinese economy was closed. So what did he do? He opened up the Chinese economy. Why are Indians doing so well in every country in the world except India? It's because your economy is closed. Open up your economy. And I assure you, you open up your economy, India will become the most dynamic economy in the world. And I always say, it is the rest of the world who should be frightened of India opening up its economy. Because if India opens up its economy, it will become by far the #1 economy in the world, because Indians are naturally competitive. But ironically, it's India that's frightened of opening up its economy, which is a great irony. And if you look at the record of, if you don't mind, you have people doing behind, ask them to go on the computer. The per capita income of Indians in the United States is $110,000 US. You get half of that. Multiply 1.3 billion people by $55,000. Give me the figure now. Quick, on your computer. Tell me.
Okay. I don't think we can do this quickly, but we'll do it.
You can.
Tell us
it's
again.
Very easy.
Okay.
1.3 billion people multiply 55,000. What's the figure? Give me quickly.
1.3 billion into 55,000. That's what you want us to do?
Multiply 55,000.
55,000 into 1.3 billion. Just put it in Google and put it on the calculator. And while they're doing that, I think the point that you're trying to make is that the same point that Indians who leave the country do very well. And if that was the per capita income of all Indians, then this would be a powerhouse, right? That's the point you're trying to make.
Yeah. No. I'm saying 50%, not double. 50%.
Okay, 50%
of the per capita income of Indians in United States. You will have, your economy will be, China and India will be smaller. China and United States combined will be smaller than India.
But what if when India opened up the economy, the Chinese just came as sort of modern day marauders and totally took control of our market? No, they're already so embedded, right?
Manmohan Singh said once, I'm quoting Manmohan Singh.
Put the number on our banner, put the number on our screen if you can. Yeah, we're getting the number, but go ahead. Manmohan Singh said.
Everybody says that foreign investment in India will mean that Indians will be exploited and will become vassals of United States. That's exactly what Manmohan Singh said. Yes. And then he added, Singapore gets more American foreign investment than any country in the world. And we just kicked out an American diplomat.
Okay, there's the figure for you on your screen. You can see it.
So it's 71.
Yeah.
It's seven,
Yeah, it's
71
confusing.
trillion, am I correct?
I think so.
71.5 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And that, where the size of the US economy is 20 trillion. The size of the Chinese economy is 14 trillion. That's 34 trillion. You will be 71.5 trillion.
But China is not an open economy, is it? China itself is not an open economy.
No, but you see, that's exactly the problem here. It is open enough to international competition that it forces them to compete. And the Chinese sell products in every corner of the world. Every corner of the world. And the Chinese buy products from every corner of the world. Let me give you one statistic. In the year 2000, total trade between China and Brazil, every 6 months, they had $1 billion trade. Today, 2020, they have gone from $1 billion every 6 months to $1 billion every 72 hours.
Okay, we're out of time, but I can end with you on this one note of agreement that
That is India's potential. You have the greatest potential of any country on planet Earth.
Thank you, Kishore Mahbubani. It's been a fascinating, educative conversation. I know you've provoked a whole bunch of Indians, and I'm going to be dealing with many more questions. So we're going to have you come back well before 10 years. The 10 years date stands, but you're going to come back well before the 10-year mark, and we'll compare notes again. Pleasure having you on, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
视频中马凯硕说中国非常害怕和美国的战争，烽火不赞成这个观点。中国人不希望战争。不喜欢战争，中国人爱好和平，但是中国人不怕战争。如果中国害怕和美国发生战争的话，那么就不会有朝鲜战争这回事了。当前世界上很多国家对中国有一些误解，比如说菲律宾、印度、美国等这些国家总把中国不喜欢战争当成是害怕战争。如果这么想，你们就大错的特错，迟早会吃大亏的。中国不轻易开启战端，不开第一枪。你有权决定是否开第一枪，但是你无法决定是否开最后一枪。关于维吾尔族人的人权问题，强迫吃猪肉这样的假消息烽火认为已经是不值一驳了。马凯硕也说了，这其实就是西方虚伪的假新闻。你认为哪个傻子会干强迫吃猪肉这种既花钱还不利于民族团结的事情？这不是花钱逼着人造反吗？这样的故事桥段也就是想故意抹黑你的人才想得出来。造这样的谣其背后目的人尽皆知可惜国际上无知的人依然是很多的。烽火还想对中印边界问题说一句，藏南地区自古以来就是中国的领土。印度在被英国殖民期间英国人麦克马洪画的边界线没有得到任何人的认可，所以印度不要再做梦了，何来中国侵占印度领土这么一说？如果这样都可以，那是不是中国可以按照高支凯线来要求印度归还领土呢？如果印度一意孤行，必将碰得头破血流。这已经在上次的加勒万河谷的对峙中已经被证明了。烽火认为印度这个国家，除非中国在国力上一直超越它、压制它，不然等它超过中国了，中印边界少不了一场战争。因为印度就是这么的短视，他们对中国是有心结的，内心其实是非常害怕中国的。再加上和巴基斯坦的武器空战中惨败，他们心中其实是怪中国的。所以在印度国内民族主义情绪如此高涨的情况下，有关于中国的各种奇葩言论也就见怪不怪了。好。 好了，本期视频我们就分享到这里。视频中还有很多细节非常值得深思反复去看。我们下期再见。